Hi students, Marissa here. I've got a couple quick updates for you before we launch into the 2024 legislative session. So we will get the committee hearing schedules on Thursday, January 4th, and that tells us what will happen all of the first week, starting January 8th. Tuesday will be the State of the State address that the governor always does in front of both the House and the Senate. They do a joint session, and it's part of the annual rituals of kicking things off. Since we are in a supplemental short year 60-day session, there is going to be just a flurry of activity, and we are going to keep an eye out for when our bills will be scheduled for hearings. Now, we've got 3 bills that we will be following this year, and I am really looking forward to discussing them with you. Also, if I use jargon related to session, that is okay if you don't know what I'm referencing right now. These are all things that by the time we get to March, you should know and be able to follow along. So this is a great learning experience, and you're going to be able to learn and follow along everything about the legislative session by the time we get through it in March. Okay, the first bill we will be following is SB 5846 concerning beaver ecosystem management. So this bill recognizes beavers as a keystone species, which is a specific category for animals in the state, and directs the Department of Fish and Wildlife to create and implement a statewide beaver ecosystem management plan. Now, this bill also establishes a grant program for beaver education and to support landowners who happen to have beavers on their property. Now, this could even mean relocating the beavers if, maybe it'd be better for them to go somewhere else. So what else is important to know about this bill? Well, the Department of Fish and Wildlife will need a lot of funding, really, or a decent amount of funding anyway, to be able to do what the bill says they are supposed to do. And that means we are going to have to look for a budget proviso in the supplemental budget should the bill pass. Otherwise, if there's no funding, there's no real point to the bill. So, also important to know about the bill is who the prime sponsor is. This bill, again, SB 5846, is sponsored by Senator Jesse Solomon, and he represents the 32nd legislative district, which covers parts of Linwood, Shoreline, and a tiny smidge of North Seattle. So, he is a Democrat, which means he's in the majority party in the Senate, and he happens to be the vice chair of 2 committees. So one is Agriculture, Water, Natural Resources, and Parks, and the other is Local Government, Land Use, and Tribal Affairs. Now, I'm guessing that this bill, since it's about beavers, will probably go through the Agriculture, Water, Natural Resources, and Parks committee. But we won't know until we see it assigned to a committee and hopefully receive a hearing before all of the cutoff dates that happen when bills need to get out so they can keep moving through the process. So again, it's SB 5846 concerning beaver ecosystem management. And I am really looking forward to an animal bill because they tend to bring out a lot of strong opinions. Okay, our next bill is SB 5884 concerning court-ordered restitution in environmental criminal cases. Now, that may sound technical, and it is. So, what does this bill do? Well, it authorizes the courts to order restitution for harm to natural resources or the environment. Now, what does that mean on a practical level? Why do we care about this bill, and why are we going to follow it this session? So if you think about something like maybe all of the big fires that have been happening around the state in the last 5-10 years or so, we'll say, well, some of those have been the result of people lighting fires and not being very responsible. So if someone were, for instance, found guilty of arson, and that arson case, again, intentionally lighting a fire with the purpose of damaging property or something like the forest, right? Because we're talking about environmental damage here. Well, if that person is found guilty of arson, then the court, whoever is in charge of the case, the judge in charge, could factor in the damage to the forest, right, as part of the overall restitution that the guilty person has to pay for being convicted of that charge. So that is technical, but I am really looking forward to discussing this one with you all because it's a different twist on covering environmental issues, and especially now when arson is actually a really significant problem in some cases. So what else to know about this bill? Well, the prime sponsor is Senator Yasmin Trudeau, and she represents the 27th legislative district, which is, a good most of Tacoma, a little bit of Fife, so down in Pierce County. She's a Democrat, and she is the vice chair of the Law and Justice Committee, which I think is where SB 5884 is probably going to start out. So also important to know, Senator Trudeau is a lawyer by training, practice, and so forth. And so she has a good legal background to bring this type of bill forward. And she also was previously at the Attorney General's office. So she's got some really good background in the court system and what it means on a practical level with bills like this. So that hopefully will be something that we get to see go through. And this is an interesting one since it is an authorizing bill. It's not something that requires the courts to act in a certain way, and there's no real budget implications for it. So we'll see if this bill has a smooth path or if something maybe causes it to derail during session. Who knows? So again, that's SB 5884 concerning court-ordered restitution in environmental criminal cases. Okay, so our very last bill is the Improving Washington's Solid Waste Management Outcomes. This one's actually a little bit tricky because it started out as HB 1131 and SB 5154 during the 2023 session. So again, Improving Washington's Solid Waste Management Outcomes, but we're going to be calling it the WRAP Act because that is what advocates who are promoting this bill have dubbed it. Now, why would you introduce a brand new bill number? Well, for a couple different reasons. First off, here is the Senate version of the bill from 2023. The prime sponsor of that version is no longer in the Senate. So that doesn't really help when you're trying to bring back a bill if you don't really have a buddy. Also, it's possible that because the bills were amended in 2023, well, maybe the prime sponsor wanted sort of a fresh version, a clean copy. They could have done work outside of session in what we call the interim period. It's basically any time of year that the legislature isn't in session, to gather stakeholder feedback and sort of introduce refreshed language as the new vehicle for the upcoming session. So those are a couple of reasons why you would get a brand new bill number. And again, we'll be looking at HB 2049, same title, Improving Washington's Solid Waste Management Outcomes, aka the WRAP Act. Now, what does this bill actually do? So this bill is based on a previous goal for the state that was set in the 1980s to get to a 50% recycling rate, sort of across the board, big goal, right? Well, for producers, for packaging, you can require, a certain amount of recyclable content as part of that packaging. And you can make it easier for individual people to understand what is and is not recyclable based on labeling on that package. And then you can also make it easier to actually access recycling programs. Now, what else is important to know about this bill? Well, all of these things have pretty significant budget implications, especially for the Department of Ecology, which oversees the solid waste management system, sort of as the oversight governing regulatory body, if you will. Now, Department of Commerce also has a part of the bill around a deposit return system that we currently don't have in Washington, but lots of other states do. It's meant to incentivize people to increase their recycling rates by turning those cans or bottles in and getting a little bit of money back. All of that becomes baked into the sales price, but it's also an important funding mechanism to support all of the programs that the WRAP Act wants. And this is sponsored by Representative Liz Berry from the 36th Legislative District. Now that is mostly Northwest Seattle, so your Queen Anne neighborhood and your Ballard neighborhood, that part of Seattle. She is a Democrat, so she is in the majority party. And she actually happens to be the chair of the Labor and Workplace Standards committee, but that's not where this bill is going to go. So that doesn't really help that much. She is a member of the Environment and Energy Committee, which is where the bills from 2023 started out during the process. And that is where we are most likely to see HB 2049 go as well. So with that, I am really looking forward to tackling this bill with you. And I am looking forward to all of your questions on the Capital Classroom Plus platform. So take care, and I will see you in January.